Hi, this is Simon Obstill and welcome to another tutorial for Motion 5. And today we're going to be taking a look at creating this interesting looking industrial title effect. So there's some quite fun things here, most particularly these water puddles with the glowing text reflected in them and some sparks and a little sort of warehouse scene as well. So let's get started. So my project is 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, and it's 10 seconds long. First thing I'm going to do is come to generators, grab a color solid, make it black, and I'll just call this background, just so we're compositing against black, always a good idea. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my cracked concrete floor. I'll put a link to these textures in the comments. Okay, bring that in, set the size to 100%. Let's set the Y position to -250, open up the rotation, and set that X rotation to -90. We'll come to filters, stylize vignette, and we'll set the size all the way up to 1.5. We don't need any blur. Let's have a full darken. So that's our floor. What we could also try and do is stylize indent. And now I've got another texture here called cracks. Bring that in. I'm going to use that for the height map for the indent filter, like that. We can turn off cracks, we don't need to see it. Just put the vignette above that because we want it to be masking everything. And set a softness of 0.5, bring the ambient down, and reduce the highlight sharpness down to, I don't know, 15. Set the light rotation to 270, and the depth to 3. And I'm just going to mix it back, so mix it back to about 50. So that's given us a bit more sort of textural interest there. I've made a mistake there. I put everything into my background group. I need to make a new group and put all that stuff into there. Let's lock the background group so I can't accidentally do that again. I'm going to call this set because I'm going to add some other elements to it. In actual fact, let's do that now just for fun. I'm going to import this thing called warehouse girders, like that. It's just a little PNG that I made. Going to set its X position to -840. I'm going to right click duplicate, set its X position to +840. So I've got a double set. I'm going to make a new group, put those guys into there. I'm going to move this back to -1000 on Z and +1000 on Y. I'll call this girders. And then I'll duplicate that, right click duplicate, and this group will set to -3000. And this just gives us a bit of actual depth to our scene. I'm going to set this group to 3D, and then those will be in the right relation to each other. I'm also going to add a light, I think, at this point. So add a light like that, move it to -100 on Z. And what I'm going to do is set its fall off to 10 and its intensity for the time being I'm going to set to 750. So you can see how that architecture there has really sort of created a sense of space there with our girders and so on. Okay, so we can close up our set. So the next thing we need to do is we need to make a new group and put our text in it. So new group there, click on the text tool, and I'm going to type the word industry. I'm going to center it up, properties, center it up here, and I'm going to come to its lighting, turn that off, just so we can see it. Let's have a size of 200, and let's a little bit of tracking there, 5, and I'm going to set its baseline to -100, I think, like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a clone of this. So right click, make clone layer, and I'm going to turn the original off. Actually, I need to come back to the original and I'm going to just add some blur there to the face, so blur of 5. Okay, so I'll come back to my clone, and I'm going to add a level, color levels, and I'm going to come to the alpha, and I'm going to bring the black up to about midway. And I think you can see what that does is it creates this sort of slightly neon-y effect. Let me just zoom in so you can see kind of nice neon effect because we're crunching the blur. So now let's duplicate this clone, right-click, duplicate. And the level behind I'm going to work on, so that bright white one is going to be the top. And then I want to make some coloured glow behind this. So what I'm going to do is add a Gaussian blur, and I'm going to turn off the levels here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add colorize. So let's take the remap to white and let's move it over to somewhere like this. And then we're going to set our Gaussian blur to 300. And then we're going to duplicate that Gaussian blur. So we've got a really nice wide one. Then we're going to duplicate this clone layer. So we've got a layer above it. And we're going to remove one of those Gaussian blurs. And the remaining one, we're going to turn that amount down to 128. Zoom back out again. You can see we've got this nice glow. So first of all, let's rename this group text. And then what I want to do is I want to work on these reflections. So to do that, I'm going to make a clone of this text group. So right-click, make clone layer. In order for us to be able to see it, we need to turn off the lighting. So come down there, turn off the lighting. And I'm going to rotate this through 180 degrees on X and bring it down to -300 on Y. So now our text is going through the floor, which is not what we want. So I'm going to come to that enclosing group and I'm going to set that blend mode to linear dodge. And now it's sitting over the top. So let's call this reflection. And in order to make this work, we need to create a matte for it so that it's only in the area of our puddles. So I'm going to make a new group and I'm going to call this puddle matte. And I'm going to import an image that I've made. Well, we puddle map like that. So this is what it looks like. It's just something I've made in Photoshop very roughly. And I'm going to come to its transform. I'm going to set its rotation to -90. Its Y position to -249. I'm also going to bring it forward 420 on Z, like so. And I'm going to add a generator color solid to this group, move it to the back, set its color to black, and I'm just going to increase its scale to 300%. Just wanted to make sure that this is covering everything and we're not going to get any holes. So let's turn that off. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here and to the clone inside the reflection layer, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to add image mask. And I'm going to use that puddle matte group as the mask source and switch to luminance. And now I think you can see we've got the beginnings of our effect anyway. So to improve the look of this, I'm going to add to this clone, I'm going to add a Gaussian blur and also a color levels. I'm going to set the Gaussian blur, I think, to 30 and then open up the alpha and I just bring that white down like that. And what we're doing here is we're just getting a bit more sort of powerful glow off that color there. Now, our original text object isn't quite enough to fill out all the puddles. So we're going to have to do that ourselves. So within this reflection group, I'm going to come down to the Bezier tool and I'm going to draw a rough oval like this and come to shape, turn on fill, turn off outline. So properties, let's zero out the X position. Let's have -249 on Y, -90 on X. And now we've got our puddle there. We can make a bit of an adjustment to it. I'm going to bring that down a bit like that, bring it up like that, grab that control point, drag that out there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to its color and I'm going to select that glow color there. Let's feather it in and let's set its blend mode to screen. And then I'm also going to use that same image mask that we used for the clone. So I'm going to hold down the Alt or Option key and drag that image mask onto the Bezier shape. And I think if I turn that on and off, you can see how well that's filling in those extra puddle areas. At this point, I just want to add a camera to give you a bit more sense of how this is all shaping up. So add a camera. I'm going to set its angle of view to 55, which brings us in a bit more, gives us a little bit more drama to the scene. And I'm going to set its X position to -360, its Y position to -60, and its Z position to -320. And then I'm going to come to Behaviors, Basic Motion Throw, open up the velocity and give it an X value of 50. So now that gives us this effect here. And you can see our puddles are looking pretty nice. We've got some nice parallax with our warehouse in the background there. It's starting to come together. Now I just want to come back to our main light here and just tweak the color so that it's sympathetic to the rest of the scene. Reduce the red a bit, reduce the green a little bit, emphasizing that blue. So now let's come back to our text and animate its appearance. So that original text layer there that we turned off, what I'm going to do is come to Behaviors, Text Animation, Sequence Text. Let's add Format Opacity. Let's set that to 0. Let's set the loops to 2. Let's come to around 12 on the timeline and hit O on the keyboard so the sequence is only running for those 12 frames or 13 frames. Here under the direction, let's select random. So that gives us that effect there. And then I want to duplicate that because I want it to disappear at the end. So duplicate that sequence, right click, duplicate. I'm going to drag it all the way to the end of my timeline there. And here I'm going to change the sequencing to be 2. And so that'll make it disappear at the end, come on at the beginning. So obviously our light, we need to animate our light to reflect the fact that that text is coming on. And let's come over to the light. Where are we? Always a good idea to put the lights at the top. So let me do that now. Put the light right at the top there. I'm going to come to, where are we? Where it's fully assembled, that's 12 frames. So I'm going to keyframe the intensity. I'm going to come back to the start, set that down to 0. What we could actually do just to make it a little bit more fun is it goes to nothing there. So at frame 5, I'm going to set that up to 400, step forward a frame, set that to 0. And we get that kind of nice little kick there. We could do the same for the end. I'll just very quickly keyframe that intensity there just before it disappears and turn it off. I won't do that double kick there, but you can do that. Let's do that, gone. Intensity down to 0. Actually, intensity down to about there because it hasn't all turned off. Step forward 1 frame and set it back up to 750. It gives quite a nice dramatic effect. So one thing that's not looking quite right is we've got this floor with all these cracks in it. So why is the water not flowing into the cracks? Well, actually, we can fix that if we come back to our puddle mat group. And you'll remember we have an image called cracks. And we applied that to our floor. So it's important that we need to set the scale to 150. I forgot to scale these to match these. So 150 on the scale, -90 on the X rotation, -249 on Y. And then we need to add color negative, and we'll also add color levels. And you can see now the water's in the cracks, but we've killed everything else. So we're going to set the blend mode of this to linear dodge. And I think you can see that that's now filled in those channels there. So the water is running between those puddles. And I think it's a lot better. What we need to do is use our levels control here to make sure that we're not picking up these bits here, these rough bits. So just bring the black in, and that'll really just give us only those channels and a little bit extra, but that's probably okay in this instance. And we might want to just add a very small blur, I think, to that. And that's quite convincingly filled it in, and I think that sort of adds a little bit of extra interest and realism to the scene. Okay, so the final stage is to add some sparks. So I'm going to do a shortcut here and use one of the built-in Apple particle emitters. I'm going to make a new group. I'm going to come to the library. I'm going to look for particle emitters, and I'm going to look for blurry sparks. It's quite close to the top there. Blurry sparks, drag that in. And we're going to make quite a few changes to this. The first of which is we're going to change the particle. So I'm going to import spark PNG, which is an object that I've made like that. It's going to work better than the existing particle. So let's drag that into the particle cell there. That's the double circle like that. And we can delete that original blur element. So let's open this up and let's first of all set it to 3D. We'll come down and set the birth rate randomness to 0. We want a life of 3 and a life randomness of 3. Let's have a speed of 25. I want some spin randomness, so let's go for 75 there. Let's come down to the bottom here where it says scale, and let's set that to 50. Open up the scale randomness, have 10 for X and 20 for Y. So those particles are looking like that now. We need to move the position of the emitter. Let's set it at -100, which is where our text object is. And I'm just going to move it up to the top there just so it's emitting from roughly the right place. Then I want to come back to the emitter and the particle cell rather, and let's adjust its color. I'm going to make it die out later by dragging that opacity slider over. I'm going to drag this colored one almost to the end here. This one let's make blue or cyan like that. So let's add to the emitter, let's add a filters glow. And while we're at it, let's also grab color curves. Hide the color curves for the time being. Let's set the opacity of the glow all the way up to 3. Bring the threshold down to around 3.5, something like that. Softness all the way up to 1. And then let's look at our color curves. And we want to bring the black in to around there and the white in to around there. It's looking like that. Then we want to add an edge collision behavior to this so they bounce off the floor. So come to Behaviors, Simulations, Edge Collision. We can turn off everything except bottom face. Let's set the bounce strength to 50. I'm going to set the height to 540. And now the particles hopefully should be bouncing off the floor like that. Then we just want them to come in bursts. We want 3 bursts of particles. So we can do that by adjusting the birth rate. So I'm going to first of all come to 12 frames on the timeline. And I'm going to set the birth rate to 0, hit the keyframe button, step forward 1 frame to frame 13, set that up to 750, step forward 1 frame, set it back down to 0. And now we get just a burst of particles like that. I'm just going to move the emitter position so it's coming out of something more plausible, like the top of the D there. That does that. Then at 4 seconds, I want another burst. So I'm going to come to 323. I'm going to set another keyframe. I'm going to step forward, set the birth rate to 750, step forward 1 frame, set it down to 0 again. So we have another burst there. But what we need to do is we need to move it along to somewhere different. So I'm going to come to 4 seconds, come to Properties, set a keyframe. Actually, I'll go back to where our original burst happened. What was that, 12 seconds? Set a keyframe there as well. So at 4 seconds, let's move it along, say, to the T, middle of the T, like that. And then I know I want another at 5, so while I'm at it, I'm going to come to 5, and I'm going to move the center over. So let's come to the N, for example, there. Now, the problem is these are going to move between the keyframes, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is we're going to open up the keyframe editor here. If we've got animated selected, that'll enable the position keyframes. We're going to select them all by dragging around them and set the interpolation to constant. And now those positions jump. You can probably see what the arrow is doing. Jumps across, jumps across. So let's come to 423. Come back to the emitter. Again, let's keyframe the birth rate. Step forward 1 frame to 5 seconds. Set the birth rate to 750. Step forward 1 frame, set it down to 0. So as you can see, I've slightly messed up the relative timings of those. So I just need to adjust those keyframe positions for the X position transform. So I'm going to grab those, holding down the Shift key, and just move them forward, or rather move them backwards a couple of frames. And now that's coming out properly. So we're starting with the D, then the T, and then the N. So to make this more interesting, I'm going to add a light that follows the particles down and illuminates the floor as we get to the floor. So let's come to the top of the project. Let's add a new light. And our first letter was D, wasn't it? So let's move over to here. I'm going to set the fall off to 25 because we want it just to be very specific to this particle system. So now the particles appear to start falling at around frame 17. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe the position. So first of all, I need to move it back on Z, so it's at -100. That Y position start, let's just move that over so that's right. Okay, so I'm just going to add a keyframe for the Y position there. I'm going to move forward till the particles hit the floor, which is there, and set that value to -240. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to animate the light intensity. But first of all, I'm just going to make sure that the light only begins at frame 17. So it's going to make it simpler to adjust this to the other letters. So at frame 17, I'm going to hit I on the keyboard with the light selected. I'm going to keyframe the intensity down to 0, step forward to where we hit the floor, 117. I'm going to set that intensity up to 1000. I'm going to step forward 20 frames, so that's shift forward arrow, and I'm going to reduce that intensity down to 0. And I'm going to open up the keyframe editor. We want to hide transform. We just want to set these values here to be ease in on the end, ease out on the start, and just smooth that out. Okay, so all we need to do now is duplicate this light and use it for the other two. So right-click, duplicate. So our T begins at around 403. So I'm going to take my copy there, and I'm on the mini timeline here, I'm going to slide it forward to this point here. We'll just need to move its position on X, so it's over the T like that. And that gives us this. And then we need to duplicate it again. So our N starts to come out at around 5 seconds. So this duplicate, let's move it forward like so. And then we obviously need to move its X position again over to the N. Drag that over like that. That's falling like that. So all in all, that's adding to the realism of those sparks. And there's literally just one last thing I would like to do, and that's to add a little bit of atmosphere. So I'm going to come to the top, add a new group, come to Object, and I'll add clouds. So I'm going to have a width of 3000 and a height of 4000. I'm going to reduce the vertical scale down to 24. I'm going to open up the gradient editor. This white color, just make a little bit bluish, or cyany like that. come back to properties. I'm going to set that X rotation to -20. And then I'm just going to move it back on Z. Actually, let's first of all set it to screen. I need to move it back on Z to about -250. And let's reduce its opacity down to maybe 25 or 20. And that's given us this sort of smoky effect. What I think I might do is move those lights that were the 3 lights for the sparks, and I'm going to move them, rather than -100 on Z, I'm going to move them forward to +100. And that's looking a little bit better. So this clouds, we can add a stylize vignette, set the size all the way up, set the darken all the way up. We don't need any blur. And we can probably just reduce this amount again down to maybe about 10. Just want to give just a feel for there being a bit of atmosphere in there. So without, with, won't spend too much time on that, but it does help a bit. Okay, so I hope that's been interesting. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again another time.